Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Represent NYC on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network. My name is Eric Friedman. I head up public affairs for the New York City Campaign Finance Board. We're responsible for the city's nonpartisan independent voter engagement initiative, NYC Votes. The Campaign Finance Board also administers the city's small dollar matching funds for local elections, which enables more New Yorkers to run for office and helps more voters be seen and represented by leaders who look like them and who represent their interests. So we're here today to talk about some more changes coming soon to the way New Yorkers vote. In just the last few years, we've opened and expanded early voting. We all started voting by mail to keep healthy and safe during the pandemic. We've introduced New York to a whole new way to vote in city elections. Ranked choice voting gave voters the opportunity to express their preferences in a more complete way. And now we are getting set to expand the electorate for city elections, to give non-citizen residents of New York City the right to elect their city leaders, which could give more than 800,000 New Yorkers a new voice in local elections. So even as the push to guarantee voting rights nationally has stalled in Washington, D.C., here in New York City, the City Council passed this dramatic expansion of the franchise into law in December. It took effect earlier this month, and we're going to discuss how it will play out, what its impact will be on our local democracy, and how we're all going to make it happen. So we have two guests here today to help us talk through these issues. First, I want to introduce my colleague, Omar Suarez. He is the Director of Partnerships and Outreach to the New York City Campaign Finance Board. Thanks, Omar, for being here. Next, we have Ara Lopez. Ara is from Queens. She's a junior at the High School for Environmental Studies, and she's also a member of our NYC Votes Youth Ambassador program. As an ambassador, she's part of a select group of young people helping to educate and empower her peers to exercise their voice in the political process. Ara, we're very excited to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So welcome to you both. So first, I want to take a minute to set the scene for this conversation. The idea of expanding the vote to non-citizens isn't exactly new. It's been around for a while. So between 1969 and 2003, non-citizen residents could vote in New York City in school board elections here in New York City until the school boards were abolished. Non-citizen residents can vote for local office in Tacoma Park, Maryland, and in 8 other municipalities. Montpelier, Vermont allows citizens to vote in local elections. San Francisco allows non-citizens to vote in school board elections as well. This policy has been under discussion in New York City for more than a decade. Versions of this legislation have been before the council since 2010. So after a concerted push by immigration advocates and their allies on the city council, in December of last year, the council voted to give non-citizens who are lawful permanent residents or are authorized to work in the United States the ability to register and vote in elections for mayor, city council, and other local offices. The new law took effect at the start of this year. Newly eligible voters can register as soon as December of this year and can vote in elections starting in 2023. The local law applies to local elections only. It does not give non-citizens the ability to vote in elections for state office, like governor, or national offices, like Congress or president. Proponents of the law say that there's a strong moral case for this law. Permanent residents contribute to our city's economy just like everyone. They keep the city running. This has been especially true during the pandemic. Non-citizens pay taxes, they rely on city services, and giving them the ability to participate helps make government more representative, more accountable, and more responsive to the needs of the people who live here. Detractors say that state law reserves voting rights for citizens only, that voting is a privilege that provides an incentive for people who live here to go through the naturalization process and become citizens themselves. As soon as the new law took effect, a group of elected officials, mostly Republicans, and voters filed a lawsuit to block implementation of the new law. And as the discussion of voting rights takes center stage in the national discussion in Congress, in the states, and on the campaign trail, all eyes will continue to be on New York City as we prepare to welcome these new voters as participants in our local democracy. So with that, I want to turn to you first. As someone who's out there organizing get out the vote events among your peers, I want to ask you to talk about what this law will mean for New York City. Do you know people who will be impacted by this law? Are you hearing about it when you go out and talk to people in the community?
I think it's really important, but I also feel that it's not doing enough. I think a lot of people are going to be affected by it in good and mainly good ways. Like I have a lot of preferably Asian friends who, it's like they can't vote. And I feel like when it comes to local elections, a local election is pretty much the same as a presidential election because all of these candidates can become presidents, right? It all starts very small. People that have their green cards or are here, through residence, it's important for them to be included. I feel like inclusivity is not always something that is given. And I also feel like, for example, my mom, when she first came here, she's an immigrant. She was afraid to do anything because anything you do as an immigrant is scary because at any point you can be taken away, etc. And I know if I was an immigrant myself and I just came from, I don't know, Colombia, which is where my mother's from, it's a dictatorship. So to be able to come to a place that you believe you'll be able to do something and then you come and it's not what it was, it's scary. And it's even scarier because even though it's not exactly what an immigrant would want, it's still better than what they had. And that's why a lot of people stay. So with this, I think that it's really important that people will be able to vote at all. And honestly, I think that they should make it for all. And also, I know a lot of people think that a lot of people in America are very xenophobic. And I think it's important to know through history that the US didn't start with immigration laws. It didn't. It started with anybody that comes here is American, right? Anybody that traveled here was American.
No, thank you for all that. That message of inclusion, of welcome. It's so important and fundamental to what we think of America really stands for and what it means. So, Omar, I want to go back to that argument that I raised a few minutes ago that the process of gaining citizenship should be meaningful and voting should be reserved for those who complete the process. So you've done some work through our NYC Votes outreach programs to work with newly naturalized citizens and help them get registered and ready to exercise their power in the political process. What are you hearing through that work?
We, and the NYC Votes team, we do spend time going down to the US CIS sort of offices downtown Manhattan, where after the naturalization ceremonies, these new American citizens are now eligible to register to vote, and we're there with everything they need, including the form, but also even a pen and all of the other swag, register to vote sticker, and even some candy and things that will make folks excited to register. And you can see it sort of on folks' faces and in their reaction that they are excited to now have this right to vote. I think that this expansion at the local level, though, it should be seen as a compliment, not as something that's taking away from that. People who are living, working, paying taxes in New York City should be able to have their voice heard. I mean, the issues that are being impacted by these local elections are very localized. I think that's the major distinction that we should remind people of. We're talking about schools in New York City. We're talking about roads and sanitation in New York City. These are things that impact people's lives directly. And so just like we have all kinds of elections in this country, right? Let's say if you're in a union, you have elections. If you're in a homeowners association or a tenant association, there are often elections. And we wouldn't dream of limiting them to only US citizens can vote in those elections, because we understand that those are the kinds of elections that impact everyone who's a member of that organization. And I think we need to look at a city as a community in a sense of people who want to live here and contribute here and work and maybe own a business here or go to school here. And so since we're choosing to be here, folks that are a part of this New York City community should have a voice in that process. And so I think that's what this change is about. And that's how we plan on communicating it to the New York City residents who are now eligible.
So, before we realize and implement any of these changes we're talking about and truly welcome these new voters into the process, we've got to get the word out, right? When you look at some of the cities and counties that have expanded voting rights to non-citizens, the number of new voters who register and participate has been relatively low. So what, in your view, are the barriers to participation and what that we need to break through? Are they different than with other kinds of voters?
So you named several of the cities that have implemented this policy. I want to just start by saying there's no place that can compare to New York City in the country or in the world. But we do like to look at other places to learn from, sort of experiences that other cities have had. With that said, a lot of the, especially the largest example in San Francisco, that was specifically for school board elections, whereas New York City is looking at opening up mayoral and city council and borough president and a whole host of local offices where I think we'll have a much bigger pool of people. And so we will, based on that, get a larger audience for this new initiative. There is a lot of work that needs to happen. This is fresh. I mean, it officially became law this month. And so our first job is to make sure that community organizations, legal service providers, other stakeholders throughout the community are aware that this is happening and how and who it's going to impact. So you mentioned, I think, anyone who's authorized to work that includes many categories. So this is for people who have green cards or lawful permanent residence is the technical term, as well as people who are here on work visas, asylees, and people who have DACA protection. So understanding who these communities are, what their needs and how they feel about voting and the city, that this is all going to be part of our research, through this year, just to get a better sense of how to approach these communities. That's the first part. And there's also, we want to make sure we understand how this is going to be implemented. There are some legal challenges. There are also some questions, how exactly is this going to be implemented by the Board of Elections? We want to make sure we have all of that down so that we're giving good and accurate information to the public.
So Ara, let me ask you, what are your ideas for how the city and how we, with NYC Votes, can help teach non-citizens about this new bill? What elements are going to be most important to doing effective outreach to New Yorkers who are going to be impacted by this new law?
I agree that there's no place like New York City. It's the melting pot of the world and it's a sanctuary city, which I think is extremely important. I think with New York City Votes, you mentioned the word get out the vote. And we did have quite a few get out the vote things that we did. For example, I did a few slides. I did a Jeopardy game and I translated it to Spanish. I asked my teacher to translate it to Chinese, and then I presented it in English, and to other people, I presented it in Spanish. So I think inclusivity, again, is very, very important. And I feel like by including people and trying to get ways to get out to people is important. For example, phone dogging. Phone dogging is important because you're calling people and allowing them to know what their voting rights are, and you're helping them figure out, or you're helping them navigate how to vote and how to be able to get their opinions and their feelings out and their passions and what they need. And then also starting young, I feel like the New York City Ambassadors program is so important because you're allowing young people to speak to other young people and adults. And so I think New York City Votes has helped me a lot learning my own voting rights. And it's a very exciting process. And it's also a very scary process as well, because I feel like when telling people their rights, etc., it's a lot of the time there can be pushback, right? Not everybody wants to be called by a random number told about their voting rights, but I feel like it's a necessary scary to feel. And I feel like I feel so honored to be able to be a part of this process. I also wanted to include, my school has this thing called Feminist Eagles, and they do a lot of voting rights, etc. as well, because my school is very good with understanding that not everybody is going to have information. And so it's important to give these people their information and give them a chance to figure things out. And I feel like in the United States, a lot of the time, there's a lot of not knowing, a lot of not being able to understand things because you don't have those resources. And that's why I think it's so important to have these resources and to have everybody included. And so back to New York City Votes, they do that. And I feel like moving forward as a sanctuary city, I think we need to do a little bit more for our people. Like, it's already a sanctuary city, so why aren't people able to vote?
All that is right. So Omar, I want to actually pick up on a point that Ara raised, which part of making people comfortable and kind of helping them understand their rights is to speak to them in a language they understand. Right? People come to New York City from all over the world. New Yorkers speak hundreds of languages, and not all of us are most comfortable in English. I mean, this is a challenge for all of us, right, in providing government services to the public generally. When we're talking about exercising our democratic rights, we are talking about the right from which all of the rights flow, right? It is even more critical here, isn't it, Omar?
Absolutely. I mean, when we talk about language, I think back to my own parents who immigrated from the Dominican Republic, several years ago, many years ago at this point. But even after becoming U.S. citizens, their native tongue, their native language is Spanish still, and having the ability to put in front of someone their information in a language that they feel most comfortable with, even if they do speak English, they may feel more comfortable. They may have an easier time engaging with information in their native language, and so I think that's part of the process of making our elections more inclusive. Now, we at NYC Votes and the Campaign Finance Board, we do publish a voter guide, the official voter guide for New York City elections. Currently, that voter guide, in addition to English, we also offer it in Spanish, Chinese, traditional Chinese, Korean, and Bengali. And those are distributed throughout the city based on sort of where languages are most common. Now, recently we had some additional legislation that's going to expand that to include all of the citywide languages. That'll expand to include like the most common languages throughout the city that aren't currently part of the Voting Rights Act. And those are Haitian, Creole, and Russian. But in addition, you also have Polish, Arabic, Urdu. And I think that's going to make things a lot easier when it comes to engaging with these immigrant communities. You have to have these resources available in a language that people feel comfortable engaging with. And I also just want to back up something Ara mentioned about the ambassador program. They are phenomenal. Ara, as well as her colleagues in the ambassador program, they also speak a number of languages and were able to engage with their community. Ara mentioned in Spanish. We also had a Russian-speaking ambassador, and I think having that come from someone who is from that community and so excited about these civic engagement issues, that's you can't put a price on that, and it's really irreplaceable as a resource.
I want to thank you for highlighting that program, and I want to take just a minute for Ara and maybe ask you to talk a little bit more about the ambassador program, what your experience has been like so far, and what your goals are as we go through the year.
As you guys, I think as Omar was talking, it reminded me of a quote that my teacher told me that kind of stuck with me, and it's from the people, by the people. And I think that it's important to, be able to tell people, it's important to have people understand. And I think it's even more important to have someone from that community be able to say this. Having somebody translate to Spanish when they're not a native speaker or they speak a weird dialect, I think it's important that it's actually coming from this group of people. For example, I have a friend, she's Muslim and she's Moroccan, and she told me once that like when people tell you from the outside, it doesn't feel the same. And so I think with the ambassador program, I joined because as a youth, it's important to be heard, but I think it's more important to have other people be heard. And I feel like as somebody that loves to listen to people, hearing people's stories and like helping people is just amazing. And then being able to phone dog is like, I think, a really beautiful process. And there's ups and downs in like the things that we do. Sometimes we get nervous, sometimes we get anxious and we don't want to do something. And I feel like the program has helped me with a numerous amount of skills that I didn't even know I had. Public speaking, being able to make things, like being able to teach lessons, overcoming, social anxiety, etc. I think the people in the program are so amazing. They can work with anything, they also speak different languages. Like, it's beautiful because just about everybody is included and just about everybody is working very hard to help everybody that they can.
All that is amazing. I think you've raised up a concept that I think is really just fundamental to our approach to this work, which is, trying to get trusted messengers out in front of people and have people talk to them in a way that they can understand and relate to. We have a challenge here over the next coming months and years in communicating to a population that may have reason to be a little suspicious of somebody showing up from the government and talking about their rights, given the way that the discussion of immigration has been going at the national level. I wonder if you talk a little bit about the approach that we take generally to kind of working with folks to make sure that we get trusted messengers out into the community to make sure these messages get through.
We have to take a very varied, multi-pronged approach, so there will be digital outreach and using social media and our great website as voting.nyc. I got to plug that, the website. But also, holding info sessions, right? Partnering with community organizations. When it's safe, doing some outreach out in the community in person, and following all safety protocols, of course, and making sure that we have educational material that's available, physical material. But with all of that said, two things. One is making sure that we are working with communities, organizations. So whether it's neighborhood-based groups or membership-based fraternities, sororities, our city agencies, community boards, public libraries out throughout the city, schools, and we have stakeholders who are speaking with community members every single day and are these trusted messengers. And so making sure that we're working with them to amplify this message. So about voting in general, because we have a challenge with raising voter turnout in general, but now with this new population, this new eligibility for non-citizens, we're gonna now jump into a whole new world, so to speak. Thankfully, we do have many partners who work with immigrant communities, bringing people through the naturalization process, but even earlier in the process, and for folks who have different immigration status. So we know that these folks are in touch with community organizations and other stakeholders, and I think working with them to make sure that this information gets out is going to be critical. But also, I think I don't want to leave without mentioning that CFB is going to be taking precautions and safeguards to make sure that people are aware of and are reflecting on and using this legal resources in the sense of knowing and understanding exactly what their eligibility is. So we want to make sure that folks feel 100% comfortable and secure that when they register and vote as a non-citizen municipal voter, that their immigration status is secure. That is absolutely non-negotiable for us and for anyone in this space. We need to make sure that people's security comes first and they are protected. So that is something that's going to be also critical to this outreach effort.
Absolutely, absolutely. I have one last question I want to ask both of you to weigh in on. Can you speak a little bit to how empowering this community will impact elections and government in the future? How creating this new class of voters is going to impact the way that candidates campaign and who ends up serving in government. Ara, I'll look to you first, and then Omar will close this out.
Yeah, I think it's the beginning to something beautiful. Like, Again, New York City is a sanctuary city, and I believe every city should be a sanctuary city where people can come and not be afraid to, want a better life. And I think it's extremely empowering, and like it just hits home in my heart to be able to give people the experience my mom and so many other immigrants never really got to have, and so like you come from a place that, is scary, and then you come to the States, and it may not be the best, but it's something that's becoming something very beautiful. And so by being able to talk to people in their language in a way that they understand, it's beyond amazing. And like, again, local can become like, it just starts very small, and I'm so glad that we're starting at all. And so being able to have people like my mother be able to vote in something small, and then maybe soon we'll be able to vote in, bigger elections and bigger until it's presidential.
Thank you, Ara. Omar, closing thoughts on how this new law can transform elections and government.
New York City elections should be for New Yorkers, and immigrants are New Yorkers. I mean, everyone, from no matter what position, what type of job they have, people who are New Yorkers should be a part of New York City elections. And this is just getting us closer to that reality, to that vision. So I think that, great things are on the way, and really excited to see how to make this a reality.
Well put. Thank you, Omar. There's more to say, and there will be plenty more to say in the months ahead as we prepare to welcome these New Yorkers into our local elections. So I want to thank both of my guests, Omar Suarez and Ara Lopez, for appearing today, for sharing your thoughts, for talking about the great work that you're doing to make elections more open and more accessible in New York City. I want to thank you, the viewers, for watching Represent NYC on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network.